Yelverton's here. He was doing lab experiments for Ben Davidson for a while, a lot of electric discharge stuff, dark mode. Did a presentation with this stuff at the EU one year, and also has done some presentation conferences.
For Thunderbolts too, experiment.
Yeah, he worked privately for the Thunderbolts Project on a couple different projects there with electrical discharge. Great stuff. But yeah, Billy's really well versed on electric universe stuff, so I thought it'd be great to have him too on the call today, since we're both diehards in this field.
Definitely. Welcome to the May 20th edition of The Electric View. I'm Neil Thompson. Today we have Heather, David, Robert, Buddy, Billy, and Trevor. We are discussing Billy's work with electrical etching and deposition, the origin of water and oil, and the mythological evidence that supports those claims. Don't forget to like and subscribe below.
Really, thanks for joining us today. And we're just fascinated by all kinds of things going on around the electric universe model, and sometimes we get a little bit esoteric, but we try to pull it back in. And Heather has written a book. It's a New Dawn, all about the electric universe, kind of introducing it to the general public, kind of thing. And Robert is very into geology. They've been looking quite a bit at like plasma discharges, particularly at upheaval dome. And Buddy has the Dory set, which is something that he's highly impassioned by.
And I electrocute stone, bone, and different material with high voltage electricity. So that gets right into the electric universe and stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's really cool, Buddy. I love your work, and Heather, I've been following you and your book. Still trying to get a copy of that, but it's on my reading list. And I've been following you guys, listening to your podcasts, and I love, the way you present the information. And it reminds me a lot of the roundtable discussions that Billy and I used to do for Ben that we stopped doing a couple years ago along the same type of format where everybody kind of has that roundtable equal platform to speak on, and I really like that.
Nice. Well, it's a great pleasure to have you join us.
Yeah, welcome to our table.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, number one, I'm glad that you're here. What are you guys doing now? Obviously I've seen tons of Billy's work, especially when I'm sure that Michael Steinbacher was riding you hard to do that a few years ago, because you could feel the passion in his words while he's over top of you, sort of like you're talking about this stuff, but I don't know what you guys are doing now. So,
well, Billy's pretty much retired. He's not doing any of the discharge work anymore like he was. You want?
By the way, Billy, love that remote control lawnmower thing. Love that.
That was awesome. Yeah, I needed that.
Anymore, I think we're just trying to keep up with the research and everything that's constantly changing, the new discoveries, and really trying not to get cemented into one philosophy, too deeply, and leave openings for other possibilities still. That's kind of where I'm at in this journey.
You have to. I mean, if it was the same thing when we were talking about the nature of gravity and what causes this and what changes mass. We were going through all of this stuff, and you can't just be the charge that causes gravity type of thing. There's and then I was just having a discussion the other day with on Facebook with Jay Henry on Electric Cosmology page there, and we're having a discussion on whether or not there's some diamagnetism involved and that kind of thing. So, but nothing quite compares to seeing it the way that we're looking at it here with Billy's work. I've had that debate right there, wondering, is this a build-up? Is this a deposition? Is this an excavation? Is it both? Like where you're having like something, because when they're right beside each other, like in the Scablands, you can imagine material moving from one area right beside itself, sort of like in these loops that Andy talks about, and almost like prominences.
What I really like about Billy's work is that you can visually see this dark mode exchange between the anode and the cathode. You can see the formation of how the Grand Canyon could come to form under those conditions. And it really makes you think, are conditions, maybe just that drastically different now, where it's just some minor tweaking, we could be back to those conditions, having them type of discharges again take place. And being able to see this and visualize this, it helps to describe the process and really helps people to understand it once they see it. Because, like Dave Talbot had to eat a little crow on some of this, and we do these discharge experiments and you can see it. You can't really argue that evidence. So you can say outer space may have some kind of discharge taking place between planetary bodies, but it's definitely not going to be the form of a lightning bolt like we would see within the atmosphere of the Earth. And that's where Billy's work has really shown us this dark glow mode and different discharge patterns, like the Terrell experiment and the work of the Sapphire Project. We're drawing these same conclusions of this fourth state of matter. It's very difficult to put any mathematical terms on it, as Haynes Alphen has stated. It's not that simple.
Yeah. Well, it ends up being nonlinear, right? I mean, none of the
laughably nonlinear.
Right.
We're expecting it to behave in the ways that other states of matter behave, and what we forget is that all states of matter behave quite differently, so we shouldn't expect it to behave like water or like gas or like a solid at all. And the way that they interact with each other is going to still be different even then, in the same way that each of the other elements, as they interact independently, are different. So it's kind of a whole new ballgame. It's very interesting to watch. These are crazy. I keep seeing like humans pop up in them, like, oh, there's his shoulders. Here he comes. Watch, he's gonna come out of this one. There's his shoulder. His clavicle. He goes.
Yeah.
And it's like, get that thing off his head.
Right.
I keep seeing how Moab is formed.
Yep.
You won't believe the crap I'm seeing in these things, you guys. It's amazing, and it's like these are the forms, right? The forms that are coming out of this plasma.
I have to share this. Just 1 second. There was something that Heather brought up yesterday. Now let's see how fast. I probably won't be able to get it so fast. The sun from the pole.
From the poles.
Can
Yes.
you put that in the chat real quick?
Is it?
Because it was just.
I've seen that. Yeah. You should. Yeah.
You know what? It's in your chat to
Oh, okay. Oh.
Because I sent it to you via chat.
Oh, okay.
Didn't I? No, I sent it to your email. I'm sorry. You're right.
Ha.
Sorry.
Oh, I sent it to Neil though, right?
Yeah, you always do that. There it is.
I got it. Yeah, I was watching this yesterday. And I'm sorry. We sometimes we take really hard left steers, and this is one of them. So, but we just running across this, just talking about like kind of harmonic action, etc. In like this is the sun from the pole, and just
right. I saw that. Someone posted that on Facebook. I actually shared that shot. That's you can even see the counter rotation.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty awesome.
I bet you we would see similar, although different because the Earth is lower power. But I bet you we would see the thunderstorms going around the planet sort of in a similar pattern.
Right.
When I look at it, it resembles more the activity on the south pole of the Earth than the north pole, because you can almost see pop out of there.
But it seems when you start looking at it this way, you start getting much more predictive because anyway, you start seeing more of the action at least.
Well, that's the trouble with plasma. There is this tendency to be it's seemingly impossible to predict. But I was like, I remember having this argument with someone. They were like, well, if plasma is so unpredictable, how then possible can you ever make these statements about what it's going to do if you can't calculate it? I go, well, yeah, but we might not be able to tell you where the lightning is going to strike, but I can tell you how many hits you're going to get per hour. Like, that's not it's not the same thing, but it's going to follow general rules. I mean, there's, like once you start getting into it, and this is just as showing in some of those pictures that we're seeing the low pressure, or it seemed like low pressure, glow mode coming across and ripping up a spider pattern on the etchings that Billy was doing there on the video, and you could see the we'll call it the electricity for now, but it was the plasma was traveling along the ground, I use air quotes, and then enter in a certain spot. This is, by the way, that's exactly what I was talking about these, to Andy. He asked me what could make a lateral blast, and I go, well, they do run across the ground. They're going to run across till they find a place to enter. With this they're going to follow the path of least electrical resistance, so to speak. And, then you could, because it's the air, is going to have this sustained shock wave. I can envision exactly what you're seeing. Of course, it changes with air pressure, it changes with magnetic field strength of the planet. I mean, and it would change depending on many other factors, I'm sure, including distance of electrode to the surface and so on. And so to think of them as just giant lightning bolts, you're right. You can't even, it's not even fair to make that comparison.
So one of the things that continues, because I'm kind of a neophyte student of a lot of this stuff, but one of the things that maybe you can help drill into my head as far as like the action between an anode and a cathode, as far as like what its behavior is, Billy, do you have any like explanation from like the beginning standpoint, maybe to get a little bit further in? Because I know that these are like this is actually Lichtenberg's illustrations of what he was seeing. But do you have any feel for these drawings at all?
Well, I guess it depends too on whether it's alternating current or direct current, as far as distinguish anode to cathode.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you really won't see a difference in AC,
right,
as much as you do the DC. But and even in that respect, the designs and patterns really don't change as much as just the amount of material that tends to go to one versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
That I noticed. I don't know.
Right. So I mean, the one thing that like keeps on kind of ringing for me is the like what actually is the action going on? As far as we define it as passage of charge, right? But like for instance, like the figure 2 here, where it branches out, it seems to me that one's kind of like, once again, from a neophyte's perspective, branching out, and like the figure 3 is kind of like the catcher, right? The absorber of it. Is that a wrong read on the illustration?
No, that's a pretty good one. I see. Looking at some of the other experiments where you see the almost like etching, where and the energy run across the sheet and push the sand away. The Thunderbolts came up with a term called EDM, electric discharge machining.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they refer to that,
Right.
Right.
Well, the Valles Marineris experiment was one of them that they referred to as EDM.
There's a
that People Dome was a machining event as well that were related to the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
I would like
I
to
did mostly dark mode discharge experiments, and the Lichtenberg figures generally didn't show up that often during the dark mode. They were fairly common in the arc mode discharge, like with a real actual lightning bolt.
Right.
Just to throw in there the actual, I would, when you say dark mode discharge, what I so that you guys know what I'm talking about or what they're talking about, whenever I usually say that term, I usually call it ionic wind or ionic winding, because it happens on comets too and stuff like that and so forth. But you basically get electricity in dark mode. Dark mode plasma discharge can move material, and you could imagine the amount of wind that would be because it's just pulled along like the jet stream, so to speak. It's just it's going with it. So, but it just to make sure that we're on the same terminology. But I'll go with yours for now. Keep calling it dark mode discharge. It's fine. It's just don't want to confuse anyone.
Yeah, I was just referencing Steinbacher's work and how most of his pictures that he would display and talk about would have two of those rings, one next to each other that looked like an uplifting, and another one with a depression, like it was pressing down. So I was just saying, you may not be too far off on what you were drawing to your conclusion there, that this may be a push type and a pull type force, two different discharge patterns, but also there's harmonics that play a role in this that we saw in Billy's work. So after, just shaking a plate, you can reproduce a lot of dendritic ridges with just the vibration. So maybe there is, a discharge and an earthquake that helps to form a lot of the dendritic ridge formations that we see, according to what Billy's seen in his work. I'd say that's probably very plausible that you have taken account any kind of shaking.
There's definitely there with Michael Steinbacher too. I was doing the Valles Marineris with the anode and cathode side by side. I had been doing those experiments for the Thunderbolts. Of course, they didn't give me a design of experiment. Kind of let me do what I wanted to do, and that was one of them that came up. And it started out with me placing material on the base sheet, the grounded plate, and then seeing what happened when you hit it with electricity. And Michael actually came along and suggested, was there a way to allow the material to fall from above rather than being placed down there to start with? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where that, grew from there, evolved from that point. Those were his suggestions.
Right.
Well, so we had already actually made the Valles Marineros before we started with the overhead discharge material.
Mm-hmm. So if you could describe the amount of voltage that you're generating and like what kind of just the system, just a quick overview, like the
for the most part. Well, the actual transformer you see in that picture right there was a 70 kilovolt transformer from a dental X-ray machine.
Okay.
And then I stepped up to a 90 kilovolt transformer, again from another dental X-ray machine. You can find those used online. They're not very expensive.
Uh-huh.
And so most everything was done between 70 and 90,000 volts.
Okay.
So, and again with the dendritic ridges, I set out with Thunderbolts. That was their main primary objective, was to recreate these dendritic ridges that we see in mountain ranges, to create that full length mountain range with the razorback edges, and
right.
And unfortunately, we never did that with either dark or arc mode discharges. Was never produced identically to what you see like on Google Earth or something.
Right.
And one day,
Shiprock has those, right?
Well, I was actually sifting sand out, sifting through some clay to get the finer material through a high mesh screen. And I had to do so much of it, my arm, you can literally sit there for a whole day shaking that thing. So I got an offset motor and put an offset counterweight on and attached it to the handle so that it would vibrate on its own. I would have to sit and shake it. At any rate, I allowed the sifting tray, sifting mechanism, to rest on the edge of the tray that I used to catch the material. And I noticed that in the tray that these dendritic patterns showed up in that material down in that catch tray. And that's when I got the idea for trying to use vibration. And once we started using that, oh man, they just showed up like business from almost 2 to 3 hertz right on up through 20 to 50 to right on through the range. And just that fine clay powder at any one of those frequencies will create different dendritic ridges. They'll just rip right up like a zipper and cut right across them. I mean, just as pretty as you please.
Right.
And so when you try to figure that in, it really makes a lot of sense that earthquake would actually create the mountain range.
And it would be, because there's such a dramatic thing happening, it would generate.
Well, you have to think in times when this type of energy was being released with close approach of planets and chaos in the solar system, with that type of energy, the earthquakes had to be astronomical, because, I mean, we see earthquakes every day right now because of electricity, and we don't see any type of discharges that we saw back then. So, I mean, the earthquake is going to be the primary event during any discharge, in our opinion, now that we know
they would talk
this
about
earthquake.
how,
And so that may be the answer as to why the mountain ranges appear the way they do.
Yeah.
There is definitely cymatic patterns in mountain ranges, some of them anyway.
Not only a discharge, but there's a frequency and a vibration, a literal acoustic vibration, involved with the discharge. So you have to kind of put all that together to see what really happened.
It's almost like there's, I mean, not just a vibration, but I mean, it was like the earth literally shook. Like it was and you'd have a piezoelectric sound type feeling going on too, because every single crystal in the whole thing would be just going nuts, I'm sure. Creating, I mean, there's so many aspects to it when you start like digging down, what is induced by this, what's affected by that. And then of course, immediately comes to mind, what were they trying to do by vibrating the earth? Like, why did you make a pyramid that rang at like exactly, C? Why were you doing that? What was the whole nature of this? Was there something that they were doing? Were they trying to mitigate something? I mean, you could see that in some of their constructions, they were linked together to avoid being destroyed by earthquakes, but was there more to it? Just immediately comes to mind.
I'll post a couple of one of those videos with the Chladni plate mountain range.
Yeah, we'll throw it right on here.
You just put them in, we'll put them up. Yeah.
The other thing that comes to mind is the morphogenic resonance during these events, and the changes that are taking place in the electrostatic environment of the Earth. And, seeds and different things, we know when you put them in an electrostatic environment, they change. They alter. Like, for example, a cornstalk put under a change in an electrostatic field, instead of producing 2 ears, started producing 6 ears. So, along the lines of Rupert Sheldra's work, and
sort of the Ebner effect, also kind of.
Yeah, the Ebner effect, that would be where it originated. Guido's work. I sent a link through to Buddy on Facebook. I don't know if you got that, Buddy. You got a lot of links posted there, but I did post one on that Ebner effect. It's kind of related to a conversation you guys had in a past call.
Doesn't that looks like a mountain range?
They're not one of them.
And then a spine.
And it clearly wants to leave the table. Yeah. Combine this with.
I'm not comfortable with all those vibrations.
Could you imagine, though? I mean, no wonder we have.
Awesome.
We have no way of deciding what actually happened to a civilization. Could just literally be buried, and there it goes, gone. Yep. What were you going to do about it? Complain?
Well, that would explain places like Gobi, Topeka, whatever how you pronounce that. Completely buried in sand.
About 1,000 feet below them.
Yeah, the whole Sahara is all laid down sand with civilization buried underneath it. Yeah. You can't throw a stone out there and start digging without finding something. So, I mean, that may have been the cradle of civilization, just completely covered in sand, and lo and behold, this sand silica matches exactly the composition of Venus' silica. So we really have to start asking these hard questions.
I did not know that the silicates matched. So that's a definite. I did not know that. That's a link.
A lot of carbon too. A lot of carbon oil was laid down that event along with the sand, which is also found in Venus's comet tail, hydrocarbons.
That also I never thought about before. But you're right. I mean, obviously I know hydrocarbons exist in the tail. I just never really thought about it as oil, I guess. When you think about it, it is, but you don't think that, because it's counterintuitive.
Well, Bill Costa wrote about that.
Yeah, perhaps maybe I should be reading him a little bit more, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
Instead of just relying on a few awesome CBC videos or something.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
aren't all hydrocarbons like oil and like that's what petroleum is, and then also how are hydrocarbons related to water, as that's hydrogen and oxygen, and things respirate oxygen and carbon dioxide, so it's like this respiration somehow or transformation of water. How does that happen on Venus's tail? Like how does a hydrocarbon form? Is there water?
Yeah, that's a good question. We went through an entire series called Star Water to try to explain this process. Me and Billy were heavily researching into an idea that Billy originally presented. Do stars produce water? And we find that a lot of these bodies full of oxygen, like Venus or the Comet or any of these bodies, have a lot of negative charge to them. And all it's going to take is a little hydrogen from the solar wind and a little fusion in that electrical environment. We have a rapid change from water to hydrides. And that's because the ultraviolet's stripping away that extra hydrogen. It's just H1O1. But the first process will make water, and then it strips, and that's what we're seeing in the comas. Is this electrolysis taking place?
Well, I thought we definitely saw HO in comet tails, but it wouldn't take much to make H2O from that. I know HO for sure. Just because it's just the oxygen coming off and combining with the hydrogen from the wind. There you got your HO. Could H2O, right. Of course, be no problem. And I think we talked about this with just a few episodes ago, where we were referring to the idea of the purple dawn stuff, and then you get into the the raining down of the constant rain of water that would just be hitting this. Just hitting us. If we were immersed in this sort of thing, you'd have that the hydrogen, the oxygen in the atmosphere combining with the hydrogen, and water would be just, as you said, it's electrolysis almost.
Right. Water is only available inside of our atmosphere. Outside in a vacuum space, it becomes a gas. We know that with a chamber. But we can detect water in space in protected fields of masers jetting from young stars and dying stars. At 138 hertz on the spectrum, we can see water. It's water spewing out. And we also see water spewing out of sunspots at 183 hertz.
Is it common? Oh, sorry.
It's just short-lived. It is very common, but it's just short-lived because you have to remember, once it breaches that magnetic field that's protecting it in that form, it's immediately hit cosmic ray, ultraviolet, and strip. So it has to convert back to gas. So liquid form, you're not going to find in space.
So is it common to find hydrocarbon along with this?
Yeah, hydrocarbons and methane, and that's another big question. How does Venus produce methane if it didn't have life? Because we know methane is a decomposition process of life itself.
Organic matter, right?
Right.
Is that why they think that Titan has it too? Because they detect methane down there?
Yeah,
methane leaks of methane. We know from when we found out California that, life can swap out the building blocks of phosphorus, nitrogen, and potassium. Arsenic can be put in there, and different things we thought were deadly can be utilized instead by these organisms. So it makes, it's very likely that a methane link could hold all kinds of microbiology.
That's crazy. And that's assuming, of course, that we're not just seeing a flat ground. We'd have to really, because we've been it's not hard to trick yourself. Like I've seen the images of Mars where they were like, oh, look, it's a lake there, and you're like, it had to have water, but when you get right down to it and actually look in, you can see it's just little tiny pits. So you can see it's probably not that. But I'm wondering if, because of the resolution, we might not be able to see whether or not is it actually a flat lake on Titan, or is it actually something that's been shaved smooth, so to speak. I'm on the fence. I don't really know. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's definitely liquid flowing, and we've seen liquid flowing like on Mars when it comes into close perihelion with the sun. It actually has running water on the surface.
In some places, I've heard, yeah.
Yeah. We found water is everywhere. It's all throughout space. It's only a step away from combining to be in liquid form. I mean, if you think about it, hydrogen is the number one element found throughout space, right? And if you step that down, the third most is oxygen. So 1 and 3 combine very easily. Billy's made water creation, water explosion experiments right in his lab. You can see how easy it is to strip the hydrogen off oxygen. It's just a little electricity. It's nothing to be combining and create water.
No, I think you need,
Earth's
what,
doing it
4.5
every day.
volts? That's about it, I think, or maybe 12, something like that. It's not much.
Yeah, it's not going to require much fusion at all. These elements want to combine. They want to separate too. It's part of the process. It's like a big Lego set. The blocks come together and they fall back apart to rebuild, and the parts are always there.
That's where it gets really interesting with Edwin stuff, where you're getting right down to the
I was
voltage.
Just gonna say that.
We think on the same lines, but yeah, just when he's talking about the bringing or basically nuclear fusion, but doing it in like when you can get 2 carbons combine and make a sulfur type of thing, and with his ideas, I find that quite compelling. I'm not sure if it definitely has merit for sure. I don't know. But obviously, it's a much higher energy process.
Yeah,
but that's why it would happen on the sun, probably. But the lower stuff, chemical reactions.
I think that was a quote from Michael Claridge that stated that while 2,000 degrees of thermal temperature will, fracture water into its separate elements, it only takes 9 volts to do the same thing of electricity.
Yep, there you go. And I think that was what it was at 2013.
Yeah, along the Claridge line, they found that there was only a very small amount of input power needed to generate the sapphire experiment. Much, much less than what anybody anticipated.
In the range up to around 600 volts, I think is what that's.
That's amazing. Yeah. 600 volts.
Yeah. I asked him about that.
Surprising.
Well, I also asked Bonnie Childs about that. And I mentioned atmospheric electricity, which we have here on Earth, and the fact that you can measure a voltage difference of 300,000 volts at the upper ionosphere down to, compared to the 0 voltage at ground. And how that would fit into the fact that they are doing these experiments with 600 volts. And their explanation to me was the fact that the voltage on Earth is relative to Earth, and the sun would only need 300,600 volts in order for the sun. That may be what the sun's at. It's only 600 volts higher than Earth potential, in other words.
Right, because this is a capacitor effect. So you take a little bit of input and you amp that up and then discharge. Same thing Tesla's worked to convert from low frequency to high frequency. Use capacitors in a Tesla coil. So
today we call those just switching power supplies and shit. It's not really, I mean, to crank it.
Like with such a low, I mean, this may be a stab from left field again, but it seems like such a low voltage would kind of point towards just the frequency action of the thing a bit, like a much lower frequency.
Yeah, it's really more about the sound we're finding. The sound that's all around the sun that it's broadcasting out makes the resonant waves, makes the Pleiades plate work, keeps the planets in orbit.
Right.
That did not escape.
If you extend that out to some extreme, I mean, it might just be one little element of like the full cycle,
Yeah. That's true, because we also come into contact with other planets' tails like Venus and creates our monsoon season. So, I mean, these little effects to the planets, their orbits, play a really key role to balancing this balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
And this may be what we're seeing, like terrestrial gamma flashes happening here on Earth, or what's similar to what's happening on the sun. That's an outward force push of momentum to keep it stable in its orbit. It's needed. And we see that on the Chladni plate when you try to put these objects too close together. What happens? They discharge and push away from each other. So, even though they're both negatively charged objects and should be attracted to one another, there's an overwhelming and overriding force that pushes it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I want to touch on was the atmospheric rivers. Water is just so plentiful in space that occasionally when we get hit with a burst of hydrogen from the sun like this, these high energy protons, we're being bombarded by an energy that will form water very quickly. And like what we saw in Texas over the last couple of years with the heavy raining down there, and it couldn't explain how they were getting, this amount of rain out of a storm. It just didn't make sense. Well, when you start looking at atmospheric rivers and what's happened along the California coastline, we can see this has happened several times in our history. And it doesn't take a debris field to, cause that much particulates in the atmosphere to start a big rainstorm. We could take just a massive amount of energy in the form of hydrogen uniting with the oxygen and cause these atmospheric rivers.
Wasn't Ben just showing that just a day or two ago, that he was just saying another one was just forming over the Texas area?
Yeah,
anybody see that?
Highlight those quite a bit because the atmospheric river plays into the Starwater series. So you'll see him feature those quite frequently on the news and mention them as atmospheric rivers.
I think he's probably right on. It's not even a debate that what you're saying is generally true with regards to hydrogen and oxygen, and you're probably not anywhere off on the Chladni plate idea with regards to the sun. The sun is incredibly loud, and thank God we can't hear it. Apparently, it would be like 140 decibels here on Earth, even at this distance, if we could hear it. But luckily, there's these waves can't get that far, so.
Right, but there are audible tones that we can put into audible range, so you can actually listen to the sounds of the sun. One of the meters that we really liked was at Galcona up in Alaska. They had the Harp-Rio meter going for public access. Yeah, it sounds like birds chirping. It sounds very pleasant. These sounds that they were pulling off the sun through this to the Rio meter. Some great data we lost there at Galcona, and then closed down that facility to the college and public access. We lost 2 really good meters that were showing us stuff that we can't find anywhere else now. A lot of those have to do with upper atmosphere research and the D region, the F regions.
Can I ask a question? Oh, I was going to take it.
Sure.
Not in a totally different direction, but just a broader question so if there's these atmospheric rivers, and then there's all of these other cosmic rivers where things are being formed and tails that are interacting and things like this, so there's this ripple effect, like waves on water, and that's basically how everything is being affected. When the wave hits it, then its harmonics are off a little bit, and it has to recalibrate itself, and that's when we get those adjustment things that happen, like earthquakes, sunspots, interactions like that. So if Jupiter can affect the sun, and our moon can affect us, and we can affect other things, is it possible, or is it within the realms of possibility to think that something that's happening on a larger planet's moon that's affecting its cycle will in turn have an effect on the sun and a greater effect on the whole? Can a little moon have that kind of an effect on things in these systems? Because you're talking about Europa, like spewing water, you know what I mean, and Enceladus and all these things. So I had this question, and I kind of got I don't think I maybe could explain the question to the full effect, but there's comets out there that are Jovian, and they come around Jupiter. So when a comet comes around the sun, obviously we've seen lots of interaction between the sun and comets. They respond. And
Right.
so if a comet is going by Jupiter, if a comet's coming by us or any other planet, there is a response. If you have comets and aphelion, which are, I don't know the term for Jovian, perihelion, but they're at the closest point to Jupiter, and it's pulling on the Jovian system right there, wouldn't that have an effect on the sun and in turn us?
Yeah, and what you may be highlighting is a lot of the variables that have not been pinned down yet. But we have had discussions with Dr. Kong Pop on this very topic. One of the experiments I would recommend everybody take a look at, if you're not familiar with it, is a recreation of a patent that Tesla had done to show interference between the anode and cathode, or two receiving antennas or two bodies, and the disruption that can take place between them two. So, for example, you have a transponder on one end and a receiver on the other end to receive the radio signal. We would broadcast, let's say, for example, at 105.9. Both receiver and transponder had to be set to that frequency. Now, if something comes in between the region of broadcast for these two frequencies, so the two physical antennas, if you pass your hand in between them, there's interference, a distortion takes place. That's what we're seeing with the comets. That's what Kong Pop's trying to highlight in his work, to show the mechanics of these planetary bodies and why Jupiter has an interaction on this 11-year cycle when it comes in closer. Why does it trigger more X flares or N flares? Because this is information we've known for a very long time, and we're not making progress. We're just recanting the same rhetoric. I want to figure out why this is happening. Why does Saturn have such an influence? What is it? Is it a body around Saturn, one of the moons that may be becoming tidally unstable? Because we have two moons, Ganymede and Titan, right now, that when they're reaching the edge of the plasmasphere every year on their orbit are getting farther and farther out. We've calculated this. Now, at a certain point, Titan will release from Saturn's photosphere. It's already acting like a comet and grows a very long tail when it gets to aphelion with Saturn. And Jupiter, the Ganymede situation is very similar. These are large moons. Ganymede's bigger than Mercury. If it were ejected to the inner solar system, or Titan for that matter, we would see a replay of what Velikovsky was trying to describe, of planets in catastrophe, because the Chladni plate would go to pot really quickly with another planet that size being thrown in. And all computer calculations show that Mercury would be ejected out to where Pluto is. So, yeah, could moons have an effect? They could have a catastrophe effect, yeah. Catastrophic.
Yeah, because I was really wondering, because they sent was it the Galileo mission back to go study Europa some more, and then they sent Rosetta to Comet 67P, and so since those two bodies have a lot of data on them, it was like what came up when I was searching, and I was like, well, this is kind of weird. So I looked at where they both were right at this time and like around this time, and then I did the patterning back, and it shows that Comet 67P is in aphelion with Jupiter. Like when I looked at it on May 8th, they were only like 33. You know, it was 1500 in Libra and 1533 in Libra, and it was headed for its aphelion out there. And now Europa is like spurting these, you know, having reactions right now, and we're having weird reactions right now. And then they're going to be sending more out. And when you put the timing, it was like every time Comet 67P was out that way, things started kind of behaving this way. So I am just an observer, right? I'm an observer, and I ask a lot of questions, and then think, you know, I don't have all that data compiled, and I don't know who does, but it you know, just at the raw look at it, it seems like these kinds of things are something worth a look, because it's really having an effect here on us. And what if it did release? What if they did release? Because Mercury and Jupiter, Pluto, they have very similar characteristics in a lot of ways, like one being the communicator, the transistor to the cathode, to the outer, and the other one being the anode, the transistor, the communicator to our anode, the sun, and then switching places would seem like it would keep it within the realms and the bounds between here, or being still there. But there's also that thought of it moving interior space. So when you think about the mythology and how things are built, everybody's somebody's father, and it's like, is that who was the star of the solar system before? And then it became the next thing. Jupiter was Saturn's dad, and or Saturn was Jupiter's dad, and Jupiter's Apollo's dad, and Apollo's the sun, and Uranus is Saturn's dad.
It's confusing, especially with intertwining Greek and Roman mythology with trying to describe these ancient events that took place. And if we listen to the Greeks, that's what the Greeks say. Uranus birthed Venus when it was slaughtered by Saturn, his son, that eventually took reign in this solar system. And then came Jupiter. Jupiter was on a long binary orbit with some red moon that fits the whole Nibiru prophecy and description to a T. And Jupiter's force slammed that moon into the Earth, and it discharged and ripped half the northern hemisphere off the Earth and Mars. And those two are left there today to signify this change that happened at some point in our history. And the best way the ancients could describe what they were seeing was to associate it with what was happening on the ground at that time. So, as above, so below. The kings were Kronos. Kronos was a human that walked the earth, but he's also during this period of time with the star reigning Saturn, which was the soul or the sun at that time. So at some point, there's been some changes to the solar system, but we go down this line of speculation and hypotheticals because we don't have a lot of the evidence. It's been destroyed, taken, removed, whatever you want to call it. It's just not there. We have bits and fragments from Aborigines, and that's what we were able to glean. The only area the Catholics could not get to, very south part of South America and Australia. Eventually, they did get to those regions. A lot of that evidence would be removed with their arrival.
But we do have associations still. Like Saturn rules the skin, the teeth, the bones, the joints, the knees. So when Saturn is playing a key role in the planetary geometry, it tends to seem like there's a lot of tectonic plate movement. And Jupiter is the liver, the fat, the adrenals, and the sciatic nerves. And so that seems like, that's kind of pulling on the magma, pulling on the nervous system of it and the adrenals. And you can feel that in your person if you're you can feel these effects on your person. So it's if we can, and Neptune on the oceans, the water, but maybe not just the water in the oceans, the water in the atmosphere, water in general, and within ourselves. So if we can look at those things to clues to highlight how these things are going to interact, we might be able to see why they would assign certain traits to certain planetary bodies or celestial bodies, and then how they behaved with each other. So if they had some kind of warrior that was constantly fighting with Zeus's mistress Enceladus or Europa, then you might know that that's a comet that you should look out for, because this is what happens on the Earth when that happens. Right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's two different categories here. You're in, scientific philosophy, and the two. You're basically, this is a lot of conscious, and we have science. And these two are hard to merge together into one. To say, that the astrology works, when astrology is very broad, and once you read and understand it, it could apply to anybody in that essence. But yet, deep down inside, by reading yours, that you don't have a lot of control of who you are, and this summarizes it. Why does this summarize it? And then you start going down this path of, where did we come from? How are we here? How does this all work? And it all becomes merged into the sciences as one. Religion, the Big Bang wants to explain it. Everybody wants to have an explanation for these things. But once you realize that science cannot provide all the answers, you have to start looking somewhere else, Heather. And that's where you're at right here. I'm at the same point. You ask yourselves, how much interference or role does man really have on this grand design? I mean, are we able to really use our minds like we were probably intended to have more control and dominion over our reality than what we believe that we have? And that's where kind of science leaves you hanging, and you have to go down that rabbit hole with placebo effect, with I am heart, and just understand the ability of these radio waves that are coming off our brains are the same that the planets are using. These are radio waves the planets use. This was the big contention between Einstein and Velikovsky, was whether or not Jupiter was emitting radio waves. The day that they discovered that, lo and behold, Velikovsky's right, Jupiter is emitting radio waves, Einstein took Worlds in Collision on top of this test and had authorized his secretary with a note on top of that book to authorize Immanuel Velikovsky in his name any experiment that Immanuel wants to do. And
then he died.
Later that day, Einstein dies.
Yeah.
A massive war. So you really have to ask yourself, are we scratching the surface? Are we getting too close? Are we learning too much? And those that know this information want to hold on to it, because if everybody knows how things work, well, they wouldn't have the power that they have. And that all may be coming to an end too.
That's why it seems like there's such an imperative to continue to find out and, take the courage and push the envelope.
Yeah.
When it comes to the connection that we assume has between all these objects, the sun and each planet and moon, there are two prime candidates, in my opinion, and we don't know this to be a fact, but we do know for a fact that these things exist. One is the flux transfer event, which has now been shown to reach Mars and Jupiter from the sun, as well as Earth. And these are large tubes of flux energy, electric energy, from the star reaching out, connecting to each planet individually. The other candidate is magnetic field. And it's well known in science that Earth is actually inside Saturn's magnetic field half the year. Earth is inside Jupiter's magnetic influence all the time. 365. That's how large the magnetic fields of those planets are. That even as we rotate around the star, we're still in Jupiter's influence.
Wow.
Half the year, we're in Saturn's influence.
Basically, when you say influence,
multiple connections that could possibly be candidates for the connections that we have that would explain when something happens on Io, we see something happen over here. There are scientific candidates for that. No doubt. No question.
Yeah.
I knew it was large.
Are important. What we're seeing with these flux tubes is that they're not just connected to the star, that they may indeed be connected in between the planets as well, and it's the mechanics for the Chladni plate. This exchange that happens is some kind of dipole immediate effect. Wall tries to describe this years ago when I presented an article from Purdue, and we were finding that certain radioisotopes here on Earth, particularly magnesium-54, will decay really quickly, start speeding up its decay rate before a solar flare happens, approximately 36 hours before the flare event even breaches the photosphere. So we're talking about something happening down in the core. And this change is felt immediately here on Earth. Now, how can that be? Now, if you have a rope, and that rope, imagine it as this flux tube is connected to the sun and to the earth, and the sun tugs on one side, the effect is immediately felt on the other side. And that's what we're seeing in the isotopes. It's a change of energy happening. They're sensitive enough to feel it, sense it, know it's happening as the event's happening in real time. So,
and what's even more incredible, sorry to interrupt, but these changes come in the form of the decay rates of these atomic particles.
Yes, we were talking about that.
Yeah. Used to determine how long something's been around, carbon dating, it uses that same decay rate that fluctuates with solar activity. So there could have very well been energy at a different time that caused decay rates to be drastically different than they are now. So this really throws a big wrench into the time theory when you look at it.
Well, this is it. We often I say on the show that when you go into millions and millions of years, it's just like saying God did it almost, because you're just giving yourself all this time without actually. It's lazy man's getting out of the problem.
Right, but there's different ways to age these things, and using the carbon-14 data on organic material is shown to be inaccurate because of the solar neutrino and how it can speed up atomic decay rates, right? So if we look at this speeding up happening here, this instantaneous transfer of energy, there's a field of energy that is connected. It may be solar neutrinos, it may be, somebody else's idea of what an atom is, or whatever this field is. It has the ability to transfer energy immediately across the entire universe. That's what this is telling us here. If it can go that quickly just between the sun, there's nothing stopping it. We can transfer information clear across the end of the universe.
Awesome. This is where we get into the formula. This is the formula for Coulomb's law is instant. It's just straight. There's no time factor in there, and that's the same thing as Wall was saying about the gravity thing. Obviously, in flux tubes, I think that we here on the show, and I'm not trying to tell you to change your thing, but in case anyone's listening, or you guys here, we use the term Birkeland currents, but astrology, it's flux tubes. That's what they call it in astronomy. So there's no reason to. I just want to clarify that in case we're all like sitting there going, "What the hell are they talking about?" Well, it's generally in the same ballpark. So,
right,
yeah. But anyway, that's just semantics almost. So, please go on though.
More magnetic terms with the standard.
Yeah, exactly.
Magnetic flux tubes versus what we know as a Birkeland current.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, big difference. So what else are we on?
So is there a way? Is there a way to simulate that, like as far as like a transmission line?
Wouldn't be uniform. Yeah, not straight linear. Like these things are arching out in a Parker spiral. It's like a sprinkler head coming out. So when we feel the effect of a coronal hole, it's already passed. It's hitting the limb, and that's the reason why we have to take into account that there's an angle of trajectory coming out, and it's an arch, just like your Fibonacci. Mm-hmm. So you got your arch coming out. We can calculate that. We use the phi angle on ACE. That's the telemetry that sits in L1. It's a satellite. That's the first sign of impending danger. ACE is going to get hit first. So anything coming in the solar wind, we got a little heads up with ACE. So know that data is just about 20 minutes off of what Earth's going to be feeling. So we get a spike in that speed, or we get a drop in the density at the same time. That's the coronal hole coming in, and it may be on the edge of the disk by that time, but that's the current flow coming out, and we're going to see that tube actually take a line with that. But here's the thing about this tube. It's not just one tube. We have several foot point connections across the sun. Some of them even reach all the way around to the backside following that Parker spiral. So you're not just looking at one little foot point connection. And if you go on ISWA, this is NASA's Electric Universe type built website tools that they're pretty much saying they're Electric Universe using all these terms and these tools. But go into ISWA and look at this field. You can see for yourself on the data charts there and what they're using. And that's a really good resource. It's also linked on Ben's website under every one of his daily news videos. It's probably one I use the most, just to see those foot point connections. Now, granted, they're not going to be up to date all the time, and occasionally we'll go with data lags where we're missing months and months of data. But here recently, they've been updating it, so we've been able to see. And it's really interesting because I think this is where we're going to find a lot of this key information on how this energy transfers in 12 minutes in a solar radiation storm. it's traveling right down that flux tube and pounding us hard. And all the electrons around the Earth are just being slammed into the atmosphere. So these are the events that we want to watch, and the solar sector boundary crossings and piercing out of the current sheet of the heliosphere are also periods that we receive the strongest, most deadliest storms. We get the floods, we get the hurricane amplification, we get tornadoes. These are being correlated now to the solar data to see that these are only taking place during solar sector boundary crossings. We formed a little 3-group guide just to try to analyze this data ourselves, but somebody really needs to write a paper on it and, put it out there for third party, review, because we see the correlation there. We're making this correlation, and it really takes the energy coming in from the sun, from that equatorial current sheet. Roughly every 12 to 14 days, we're going to go through this current sheet. And it's a 9-day period. We go 4 days in turmoil, flashing back and forth, north and south polarity on phi on the ace. And then we lock into it. We're in a very dense amount of electricity at this point. And we're getting storms on the Earth, rain's coming, we're getting all kinds of activity here, winds blowing. And during these solar sector boundary crossings, when we're in that energy, that's when we also are going to take the largest earthquakes and natural disasters, volcanoes and stuff like that. Now, if you put in planetary configurations and line up the planets and put them in the right order and coronal hole right in the center of the disk, there's something very unusual that happens. We made this correlation to solar polar fields. When you have a co-interactive rotating region like a coronal hole, center disk, equatorial, there's something taking place on the poles of the sun. So we go over to Wilcox Observatory and we can see that they're having a problem reverse north and south. One of them's locked in, the other one's unstable till 2014. And it actually locks in the end of 2014, and we just now are analyzing solar cycle 24 data and realizing that it's not panning out to be what we thought it would be at all. And I'm trying to get this out there. There were certain forecasts for 24 that did not come into play. And one of those was the Gauss strength of the sunspots themselves. They had to drop below 2,000 and stay there at 15 before the photosphere would stop producing sunspots. That did not happen. We had the same umbra size from 21, 22, 23. It's not decreasing in 24. We still have strong umbra size and we still have strong magnetics. We actually recorded the largest or the strongest magnetics using the Zeeman calculations on a sunspot ever calculated 6,500 Gauss during solar cycle 24. During solar cycle 24, we also had a near kill shot. That if that thing didn't come off the backside of the sun and was facing Earth, we would not be sitting here talking with our technology today. It would fry the entire infrastructure. But those two factors alone are being overridden by one factor, a decreasing sunspot count number. That does not mean we're going into grand solar minimum. We need at least 3 sunspot cycles before we can determine if we're headed into grand minimum. You have to remember, during these grand minimums, we go several cycles with very few sunspots, very few.